The highway stretched out like a ribbon of silence beneath the night sky, its lanes bathed in the soft flicker of passing streetlights. A black sedan moved steadily in the right lane, its engine humming low. Behind the wheel sat Veronica Caldwell, newly appointed director of the FBI. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of a long day behind closed doors, a classified briefing that would keep most folks up at night. For her, it was just another chapter in a life built around duty, precision, and quiet resilience. She had been driving for close to an hour, letting the rhythm of the road steady her thoughts. The speedometer read a perfect 65. No swerves, no heavy foot, just order the way she liked it. But then, without warning, red and blue lights bloomed in her rearview mirror, bright, sudden, and out of place. Her fingers tensed slightly on the wheel. Not out of fear, not yet, but from instinct. She glanced again at her speed. She hadn't done anything wrong. Still, she signaled, eased onto the shoulder, and parked. Years of experience told her it was probably nothing. After all, she had worked alongside police her entire career. She understood the system, believed in it, even when it faltered. But something about this moment, something felt off. The patrol car behind her didn't move. The officer inside took too long. That kind of pause, stretched and deliberate, carried a weight she couldn't ignore. Veronica adjusted her mirror, trying to get a glimpse of the driver. When the cruiser door finally opened, a man stepped out, tall, stiff, and unfamiliar. She didn't recognize him, which wasn't unusual. She didn't know every uniformed officer in the state, but the way he carried himself, the way his hand lingered near his holstered weapon as he approached, it sent a ripple through her trained mind. She rolled her window down halfway and rested her hands in plain sight. "Good evening, officer," she said, her voice measured, steady. No greeting came back, just a flashlight in her eyes and a flat demand, license and registration. No explanation, no courtesy, just command. Veronica didn't move right away. Her instincts, honed through years of high-stakes negotiations and dangerous missions, told her this wasn't routine. This wasn't standard protocol, not even close. What had started as an empty road home was shifting into something darker, something familiar in a painful way. And though she didn't know it yet, that quiet highway was about to become the center of a very loud reckoning. Veronica Caldwell kept her hands steady on the wheel, the cool night air drifting through the open window. Her breath came slow, controlled, not out of fear but preparation. Something about the officer's silence, the way he approached, felt too practiced, and not in a good way. The flashlight's beam still hovered on her face far longer than necessary, tracing her features like it was looking for something to doubt. "License and registration," he said again without so much as a reason why she'd been pulled over. Veronica's voice was calm even. "May I ask why I'm being stopped, officer?" He didn't answer, just stared, chewing his gum as if the sound filled the silence with authority. He repeated his demand, his tone flatter now, less patient. She didn't reach for anything yet, not because she was scared, but because her instincts were speaking loud and clear. This wasn't how it was supposed to go, and she'd read enough reports, too many in fact, to know how quickly a routine stop could become something irreversible. "I'm reaching for my purse," she said slowly, keeping her voice low and deliberate. "It's on the passenger seat." No acknowledgement, not a word. She moved anyway, cautiously retrieving her wallet and holding out both her driver's license and her FBI credentials. She made sure they were clearly visible, angled into the light. Any officer trained in basic law enforcement would recognize them on sight. The man didn't take the IDs. His eyes flicked down just briefly, then back up to her face. Blank. Unimpressed. "FBI, huh?" "Yes, sir," she replied simply. There was a long silence. Then he said it off, it's soft but firm. "Step out of the vehicle." Veronica blinked, unsure she heard him correctly. "Excuse me." He took half a step back, his right hand still hovering near his sidearm. "Step out of the car." The air between them changed, no longer just tense. It grew heavy, thick, a kind of silence that warned of what was about to follow. Veronica had done everything right. She'd complied. She'd identified herself. Yet here she was being treated like a suspect. Or worse, she'd read the stories, watched the footage, comforted the families. But never, never had she expected to be in the center of one. Her voice stayed level. On what grounds, officer? For the first time, he faltered. His lips parted, but no explanation came. Then instead of answering, he did something worse. He stepped in closer, the flashlight angled up, shining straight into her eyes. Blinding, disorienting. I don't have to explain myself to you, he muttered. Veronica didn't flinch. Actually, you do. She held her voice steady, though she could feel the shift happening inside her like a warning bell, quiet but clear. This wasn't about protocol. This was about power. Lady, he said, jaw tightening, I don't give a damn who you work for. Veronica's heart was calm, but the rage simmered quietly beneath. Not for herself, she'd been trained to handle situations like this, but for every name she'd ever read in a case file, every person who never made it home from an ordinary stop gone wrong. Let's call your supervisor, she said, her tone cool. Even. Let's see if he feels the same. The words hit him like a spark. He slammed his palm hard on the roof of her car. The noise exploded in the quiet like a gunshot, making her jolt instinctively, not out of fear, but because she knew this was no longer a traffic stop. This was a challenge. I said, get out. Veronica looked up, finally catching a glimpse of his nameplate under the flashlight beam. D. Kearns. She would remember that. Her fingers twitched, wanting to reach for her phone, but she didn't. She knew better than to move suddenly. Too many others had. Too many others never got to explain why. You're making a mistake, she said, her voice low and precise, honed from years of interrogations and delicate negotiations. Kearns let out a short, bitter laugh. No, the mistake was thinking you could pull rank on me. That's when she saw it, his right hand twitching near his belt. Her pulse didn't quicken, but her awareness sharpened. He was considering it, drawing. Her eyes locked on his, reading him like she'd done to countless suspects. But this time it wasn't about guilt. It was about control. Before she could move or speak again, headlights flooded the scene. A second cruiser pulled in behind his. More lights, more shadows cast across the pavement. Relief flickered only for a moment. Another officer could mean accountability, or it could mean backup. The second man stepped out, tall, stocky face, unreadable in the glare. No nameplate, no introduction. Problem here, he asked, glancing from Kearns to Veronica. Just a non-compliant driver, Kearns answered, smirking. Veronica said nothing at first. Her eyes studied the new arrival. She saw it before he even opened his mouth, solidarity. This wasn't help. This was reinforcement. Ma'am, the second officer said, stepping closer, please step out of the vehicle. Not Director Caldwell. Not even Miss. Just ma'am. Stripped of title, stripped of authority. She might have been anybody. She might have been nobody. Veronica inhaled slowly, her mind already working through the possibilities. Comply and she's vulnerable. Refuse and they escalate. She had been in war rooms across from dangerous men on foreign soil. But this stretch of American highway was beginning to feel just as dangerous. Her options narrowed. Her pulse held steady. Deliberately, she reached for the door handle, one hand raised visible. The other moved with purpose. Kearns stepped back just slightly, giving her room. The moment her feet touched the pavement, she felt it, the cold wind, the sharp presence of threat lingering too close behind her. Turn around, Kearns barked. Veronica didn't move. You haven't told me why I'm being detained. Suspicious behavior, he said. What behavior? Refusing to comply. A trap. If she resisted, it justified their force. If she didn't, she gave up all control. Before she could decide, his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Hard. Too fast. Her body instinctively pulled back just enough to not provoke, just enough to stay on the line. Get your hands off me, she snapped, her voice sharp and cutting through the quiet like glass. He didn't let go. The second officer edged closer. We got a problem here. I think she's resisting. Kearns said louder now, that phrase. She's resisting. Veronica's stomach twisted. She knew what came next, and she was right. Kearns dropped his other hand to his holster, unsnapped it, and before she could draw another breath, a gun was aimed straight at her face. Not 2 feet away, not on a battlefield, not in an enemy stronghold. Here, on the side of an American road. And for the first time that night, Veronica Caldwell, director of the FBI, stood completely unarmed and utterly alone. Time slowed to a crawl. The cold steel barrel of the gun hung in the air no more than a foot from Veronica Caldwell's face. The night already tense turned razor sharp. Streetlights above still blinked, casting long shadows across the roadside. But in that moment, all Veronica saw was Officer Kearns, his fingers tight on the grip, his jaw clenched, his breath shallow. This wasn't law enforcement. This was intimidation. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't beg. She'd spent her life walking through fire often, with nothing but her voice and her badge. But even so, nothing about this felt routine. It wasn't like facing down cartel leaders or interrogating domestic terrorists. This was worse. This was a man with a badge backed by silence, fueled by something ugly that had no place behind a uniform. "Do you feel powerful now?" Kearns asked the question, more of a taunt than anything else. Veronica's hands remained raised, palms open, fingers spread, every move deliberate. She stared at him, her eyes steady, her breath controlled. But inside something shifted. It wasn't fear, it was fury, quiet, focused, and deep. Not for herself, but for the dozens of names she'd signed off on in reports just like this. Men and women who didn't wear a badge, who didn't have rank or clearance, who didn't make it home. This right here was why their stories had ended the way they had. She opened her mouth to speak. She was ready to take back control. Her training had prepared her for moments like this. But just as the words began to form, a voice rang out from the darkness. "Hey, I'm recording this." It cut through the tension like a crack of thunder. Veronica's head turned just slightly, careful not to make any sudden moves. A man stood a short distance away near the shoulder of the road, his phone raised high. The screen glowed in the night, reflecting faintly off his glasses. His voice didn't waver. "You sure you want to do this, officer?" For the first time, Kearns hesitated, just for a breath, but it was there. The fear of being seen, the fear of proof. His grip on the gun didn't loosen, but the arrogance in his posture faltered. That flicker of doubt was everything. Veronica caught it, held it. The second officer, still lurking behind, shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the stranger with the phone. For the first time, he looked unsure, uncertain. They weren't in control anymore. She could feel it. Kearns glanced at his partner, then at the phone, and then back at Veronica. His mind was racing, the mask slipping. They'd counted on silence, darkness, on her backing down. But now there was light, and worse for them, there was a witness. Veronica took her chance. "Put the weapon down," she said, her voice sharper now. Commanding. Kearns didn't move, but she could see it in his eyes. He was unraveling. His chest rose and fell a little faster. His next move would either deepen the damage or let him back away. The second officer's radio crackled. "Unit 47 status." The question hovered unanswered, then faint at first sirens. More cars were coming, and this time they wouldn't be on Kearns' side. His grip on the weapon finally loosened just slightly. It didn't go back in the holster, but it wasn't pointed at her anymore either. His mouth twisted, jaw tight. "Get him to stop recording," he muttered to his partner. Veronica's stomach turned. She knew what that meant. Erase the evidence, rewrite the story. The second officer started toward the witness, a hand moving toward his belt. Veronica stepped forward, just one step, but her voice cut clean through the space between them. "Touch him," she said, "and I will personally see you charged with obstruction of justice." That stopped him cold. For the first time since this began, she saw uncertainty in both their eyes. The sirens were louder now, coming fast. The blue and red light painted the asphalt in wild strokes. Within moments, the road filled with new cruisers. Doors flew open. Uniformed officers spilled out hands near holsters, but not drawn, not yet. They didn't know what they were walking into. Then someone spoke. Director Caldwell, it was a voice from one of the new arrivals, a lieutenant judging by his insignia. Kearns didn't react, but his partner did. He stiffened, said nothing. The lieutenant's eyes scanned the scene. Veronica, with her hands still raised. Kearns holding the weapon, the witness, with his phone still trained on the scene. It didn't take long to understand. Veronica slowly lowered her hands, not in surrender, but in quiet defiance. "Lieutenant," she said clearly, "I want these officers detained right now." Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It landed. The second officer stepped back, starting to speak. "Hold on. Not another word," she snapped, turning to face him fully. "I know exactly what this was." "And so do you." She pointed toward the witness, whose phone continued recording unwavering. The lieutenant paused, jaw tight. He was calculating, figuring out whether he was staring at a bad stop or a career-ending scandal. He chose wisely. He turned to the nearest officer. "Cuff them both." Kearns exploded. "You've got to be kidding me." His voice cracked more disbelief than protest. Veronica didn't blink. "You pulled a gun on the director of the FBI, Officer Kearns. Let me know if you'd like to add resisting arrest to your list." The cuffs came out. Kearns's hands were yanked behind his back, the metal clicking tight. His partner didn't resist. He just looked down at the ground at his feet at nothing, like a man who knew the tide had turned. The weight of years of silence had just landed squarely on their shoulders. But for Veronica Caldwell, it wasn't just about the cuffs or the charges. Not anymore. What had happened tonight was never just about two bad officers. It was about the system that allowed them to believe they'd never be caught. And for the first time in a long time, that belief had failed them. The sirens had faded into stillness now. Their echoes, once piercing and urgent, had been replaced by something far quieter, something heavier. Accountability. The flashing lights from the squad cars lit the pavement in shifting colors, casting long shadows across the roadside brush. Veronica Caldwell stood steady, her breath evening out after what had felt like a lifetime lived in just 20 minutes. But the tightness in her chest hadn't lifted. Not yet. In the distance, Kearns stood in handcuffs, his face a mix of disbelief and indignation. His partner said nothing, just stared at the ground like it might swallow him whole. The witness, still clutching his phone, remained by the side of the road, his camera light flickering like a steady flame. The lieutenant who had taken charge walked back toward her. He was younger than she expected, maybe late 30s, clean cut with a badge that hadn't yet dulled under the weight of years. "Director Caldwell," he said carefully, his voice lower now. "Do you want to press charges personally or—" Veronica looked at him, her eyes sharp, voice cool. "This isn't personal. This is systemic." She didn't blink as she continued. "I'll be filing an official report first thing in the morning, and I want internal affairs involved immediately." The lieutenant hesitated, then gave a nod. Understood. But Veronica wasn't finished. "I also want full access to both of their disciplinary records. No redactions, no delays, full transparency." Another pause. The lieutenant glanced around, perhaps hoping someone else might speak up. But all eyes were on him. "If you think I'm going to let this get buried," she said, her voice calm but unyielding, "you don't know who you're talking to." Silence. Then finally, "I'll make the call." "Good." Around them, officers began to disperse, some taking notes, others quietly murmuring among themselves. A few glanced at Kearns with clear disdain, the kind that said they knew or at least suspected this wasn't the first time. But now it was on record. Now there was proof. By dawn, the footage was on every major news network. The clip, no longer than 3 minutes, was as clear as day. A woman, calm and compliant, facing down a drawn weapon from a man who refused to acknowledge her authority, her humanity, or her badge. By noon, the Department of Justice had announced a formal investigation. Kearns was stripped of his badge and booked for assault with a deadly weapon. His partner was suspended indefinitely pending further inquiry. The local police department issued a carefully crafted public statement, one that read like damage control more than accountability, but it was too late. The truth was out, and this time it had teeth. Veronica sat in her office, the walls quiet around her. Morning sunlight pushed through the windows in soft gold streaks, but she didn't look up from the screen. News anchors repeated her name with a mix of reverence and tension. Commentators debated the footage. Politicians issued statements, but none of it changed the ache in her chest. This wasn't the first time she'd seen abuse of power. Wasn't the first time someone wore a badge like a shield for their worst impulses. But it was one of the few times someone caught it in real time, and even fewer when that someone was her. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. Normally she wouldn't have answered, not on a morning like this, but something told her to pick up. Director Caldwell. The voice was familiar, cautious. This is the guy from last night, the one with the phone. She leaned back in her chair. Her voice softened. I remember. I just wanted to say, I appreciate what you're doing. Most people wouldn't have stood their ground like that. There was a pause. Then, with more honesty than she expected, he added, they do this kind of thing all the time. Just not to someone like you. Those words stung. Not because they were harsh, but because they were true. This wasn't new, not by a long shot. The difference was she had the authority and visibility to fight back and be believed. Most people don't have the power to, she said quietly. Another pause. Then from deep in her chest, but I do. She sat in the silence after the call ended, staring at her own reflection in the darkened computer screen. A woman who'd risen through the ranks, worked twice as hard to be heard, and still found herself staring down the barrel of a gun on a lonely road, her badge dismissed like it meant nothing. Not because of what she'd done, but because of who she was. The witness had said it best. They do this all the time, just not to someone like her. She couldn't let it go. Wouldn't. Because for every name she'd read in the margins of case files, every family left behind with no one to believe them. This wasn't just a traffic stop gone wrong. This was a system crying out to be held accountable. And this time she was listening. Back at the roadside, the early morning wind tugged at Veronica Caldwell's coat. The adrenaline had thinned, but its echo remained sharp and unforgiving. The officers who had come in response to the call were wrapping up their scene. Statements were being taken, cars repositioned, cameras still rolled. But the real storm had already passed. Or maybe Veronica thought it had only just begun. She stood a few yards from where Kearns now sat in the back of a squad car, his wrists bound, his head turned toward the window, his expression still locked in disbelief, as if the world had suddenly turned upside down simply because he couldn't bend it to his will anymore. His partner was seated in a different vehicle, his shoulders slumped, hands folded, eyes unfocused. A man who had bet on silence and found himself surrounded by sound. Veronica took in the scene with quiet clarity. It wasn't just about these two. It never had been. It was about the years of unchecked behavior that allowed them to think this was acceptable, normal, unseen. But tonight had been seen, and that mattered. The lieutenant approached again, this time slower, his face a little more pale under the flashing lights. There was no more pretending, no more avoiding the weight of what had happened. Director, he began, we've contacted internal affairs. They'll be here within the hour. Veronica gave a small nod. Good. Make sure everything from the dash cams, body cams, and the witness footage is secured. He hesitated. Some of the body cams weren't turned on. Of course they weren't. That was no accident. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. Then the witness footage is all the more important. The lieutenant gave a brisk nod. Understood. Veronica turned her eyes toward the cluster of officers still standing nearby, some exchanging quiet words, others just watching. She recognized the look in their eyes, the mixture of shame, caution, and relief. The unspoken question that hovered over moments like this, would I have done the same? She didn't want their apologies. She didn't want their sympathy. She wanted change. She stepped away from the group and found herself back beside the man who had recorded it all. He was still there, standing with his phone now lowered but still on. The screen's faint light glowed against his palm. "You stayed," she said softly. He looked at her. "I had to." Veronica let out a slow breath. "That mattered more than you know." He shrugged, but his voice cracked slightly. "I've seen it go the other way. I've seen it not make the news. I figured, at least this time somebody would have your back." She looked him in the eye, and for a moment they shared something that didn't need words. "What's your name?" she asked. "Marcus," he said. "Well, Marcus," she said, "you helped keep me alive tonight." He lowered his gaze, uncomfortable with the weight of that truth. "You shouldn't have needed help. You're the director of the FBI, exactly," she replied. "And if they do that to me," he nodded slowly. "I know." The silence between them was filled with meaning. Neither needed to say the rest. As dawn crept in behind the hills, casting soft orange across the treetops, Veronica stepped back to where Kearns was being processed. He still hadn't said a word since being cuffed. But his eyes found her now. There was no more bluster in them, just confusion, anger, and underneath it all, fear. "This is a misunderstanding," he muttered, as if repeating it would make it true. Veronica tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Then let's clear it up at headquarters." He didn't respond. She looked toward the second officer and addressed the lieutenant once more. "I want both of them transported separately. I want statements recorded immediately. And I want that vehicle searched for anything they may have tried to discard. Any footage, any logs, any records of prior stops tonight." The lieutenant didn't argue. He simply turned and gave the orders. Veronica stood still, her hands clasped in front of her, her posture calm, but charged with a purpose too long delayed. She wasn't here just as a victim. She was here as a witness, yes, but also as a reminder, a reckoning. The message was clear. This wasn't going to be another story whispered about behind closed doors, not swept under a rug, not diluted into paperwork. It was going to be seen, felt, faced. By the time the sun had fully risen, Veronica was finally escorted to a separate vehicle. As she climbed in, she caught one last look at Kearns being placed into the back of another cruiser. His face was pinched and rigid, the look of a man who had lived too long without consequences, now watching the world catch up. She didn't smile. There was no victory in it, just necessity. The cuffs around his wrists weren't revenge. They were a warning to every officer who ever thought silence would protect them, that rank could be ignored, that someone's skin color made them less worthy of respect or safety. And this time someone had recorded the truth. This time someone had refused to look away. By the time Veronica Caldwell reached FBI headquarters later that morning, the world already knew. Footage from Marcus's phone had gone viral before dawn, spreading across news channels, social media feeds, and morning talk shows. The video, bare, unedited, and undeniable, captured every second of what had happened. A decorated black woman director of the FBI standing on the side of a quiet highway with a gun pointed at her face by a man in uniform. It was no longer just a private violation. It was now a national conversation. Veronica watched the coverage in silence from her office, her elbows resting on her desk, her fingers steepled gently beneath her chin. On the screen, a news anchor recounted the incident while clips played in slow motion, the flashing lights, the drawn weapon, the voice off screen shouting, "I'm recording this." The anchor's tone was sober, reverent, almost afraid to speak too plainly, as if the footage itself was doing all the talking. It was. Veronica didn't need to speak either, not yet. Her inbox was overflowing, press requests, official briefings, statements from public officials, some offering support, some seeking distance, most carefully worded and painfully vague. The kind of language crafted more to manage fallout than to offer solidarity. She'd seen it before. She wasn't surprised. But she was still angry. Not the kind of anger that clouded judgment. Not the kind that burned hot and fast. No, this was the quiet kind, cool, steady and settled deep in her bones. It was the kind of anger that came from knowing how many others hadn't been believed, how many others hadn't been spared because a bystander happened to hit record in time. A knock on her door. Her assistant leaned in. "Ma'am, the Deputy Attorney General's on line 1, and CNN is holding for a statement." Veronica nodded slowly. "Let them hold." She picked up the line. The call was short, mostly formalities. The deputy AG expressed deep concern and commitment to a full investigation, promised the Department of Justice would cooperate fully, offered to assign a liaison. She thanked him, then told him what she expected next: full cooperation with internal affairs, full access to every complaint, every piece of body cam footage, every disciplinary review tied to Officers Kearns and Morales. No delays, no redactions. When the call ended, she leaned back in her chair and exhaled, the weight of the morning settling on her shoulders like a coat she didn't ask to wear but refused to take off. Then her phone rang again. Another unknown number. She almost let it go, but something told her to answer. Director Caldwell, came the voice, quiet, hesitant. "Yes, it's Marcus. I know you're probably busy, but I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're okay." Her chest tightened at the sound of his voice, so ordinary, so decent. "I'm all right," she said softly. "Thanks to you." There was a pause on the other end. "I meant what I said," he added. "They've done this before. Not just once or twice. They've stopped people I know, family, neighbors. But nobody ever believed us. Not until you." Veronica's hand tightened slightly around the phone. His words hurt more than she expected. "Most people don't have the platform I do," she said, her voice low. "And that's exactly why I can't let this go." "You're not going to, are you?" "No," she said. "I'm not." By midday, the police department had issued its official statement. It was short and filled with the usual phrases: deeply regrettable, under review, officers placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But it didn't matter. The video had spoken first, and louder. Officer Daniel Kearns had been formally charged with assault with a deadly weapon and abuse of authority. His partner, Officer Rick Morales, had been suspended indefinitely and placed under investigation for obstruction and failure to intervene. The charges sent a ripple through the ranks, not just in their department, but across neighboring precincts, federal agencies, and city councils. Officers whispered, officials drafted new memos, supervisors called emergency meetings. Everyone was scrambling, some to protect themselves, others to finally do something meaningful. Veronica stayed steady. She gave no press conference that day, no public statement, not yet. She didn't need to posture. She didn't need to perform. She had already spoken with her presence, her restraint, and her refusal to be silent. And the country had heard her. From her office window, she watched people gather outside: journalists, activists, onlookers, even some off-duty officers. Not to protest, not yet, but to watch, to bear witness, because something was shifting. And whether they were ready or not, they could all feel it. Veronica turned away from the window and looked at the files on her desk: internal audits, civil rights reports, names that had never made the news. "This wasn't just about me," she whispered to herself. And it wasn't. It was about everyone who didn't wear a badge, everyone who didn't have a title to shield them, everyone who had been pulled over, profiled, humiliated, or worse, and then told their story was just a misunderstanding. Not this time. Not anymore. Evening came quietly. The lights outside FBI headquarters dimmed as the day wound down, but inside, Director Veronica Caldwell remained at her desk, hands folded, eyes thoughtful. The weight of what had happened hadn't left her, and not entirely. It clung to her like a memory you can't quite shake, no matter how strong you are. But there was something else too. Something steady, something true. A sense of purpose that had grown stronger in the silence that followed the storm. The news had moved on quickly, as it often does. But this time it had left a mark. Officer Kearns faced charges that wouldn't just vanish with a whisper. His partner Morales was under review, his badge, now a question mark instead of a shield. And the footage, the raw, undeniable truth had traveled further than Veronica ever expected. It had sparked conversations, anger awakening, but most of all, it had given voice to those who'd never had one. Veronica stood at the window looking down at the darkened street. She thought about Marcus, a stranger who had done something extraordinary simply by caring enough to act. She thought about the dozens, maybe hundreds of others whose stories would never be told, whose names wouldn't trend, who weren't believed, and she whispered to herself just loud enough to hear it, not anymore. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Marcus, still watching, still recording, just in case. She smiled soft and sad. That simple sentence meant the world. Because justice doesn't always come with headlines or handcuffs. Sometimes it begins when someone says, I saw what happened, and I'm not letting it go. This story reminds us that dignity is not something anyone should have to earn. It's something we all deserve on every road, in every uniform, in every skin. Veronica Caldwell stood her ground, not with fury, but with quiet resolve. And in doing so, she showed us that resilience isn't loud. It's steady. It's human. And sometimes it only takes one voice, one witness to change everything. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of a truth you hold dear, I hope you'll take a moment to share your thoughts. Leave a comment if you'd like. Let your voice be heard. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories that speak from the heart and shine a light on the quiet courage in our world, I'd be honored to share them with you. Take care of yourself, and thank you for listening.